Pigweed here. Today we review an IPA and discuss reparations. Hello and welcome to Beer and Conversation with Pigweed and Crowhill. Good evening, Crowhill.
Good evening, Pigweed.
So, what's on your mind?
Well, I don't know if you know this, but my sister is really into genealogy.
Ah,
And she's been doing a lot of research on family history.
okay.
And unfortunately, one thing that she found
Yeah.
was that your great-great-grandfather
Mm-hmm.
stole $1,000 from my great-great-grandfather.
Oh, really?
Yes. So today I calculated today's value.
Yeah.
You owe me $31,060.35.
Wow! That's tough. I can't even pay the federal tax bill just that I owe.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
sorry, that's the way it goes.
Well, I guess that you have to right the wrongs.
Have to right the wrongs of the past.
Yes.
That's right.
Okay, let's get right into this cold IPA from Three Floyds.
Three Floyds. This is a funny name, and they're out in Indiana. Is that
Yes,
right?
they are Munster, Indiana,
Mhm.
and there was just different states have weird distribution stuff. You couldn't get any Three Floyds for a while, and so it's here now. They're big in hoppy beers.
Yeah, this is a
Beautiful.
hazy IPA, and
Yeah.
it's got quite an aroma to it.
It's a double hopped,
Mhm.
6.5.
Double dry hopped,
Double
right?
dry hopped. And
Woo! Yeah, a lot of hops going on in there.
yes, but they're keeping their recipe close to the vest, aren't they? They didn't really give.
Yeah, they don't give as much about the recipe. It is 6.5%.
It's hazy.
IBUs are 63, which is up there, but it's got a lot of hop aroma and
Yeah.
a lot of flavor and a decent amount of bitterness. It's
Yeah,
quite hoppy.
it's very light. You can't see through it for the haze.
Yeah, because it looks like a glass of orange juice.
Yeah, that's
But very good.
very good.
Especially if you like
very
hops.
good.
If you like hops, try this one out.
All right, so yes, we
Reparations.
need to right wrongs.
Yes, of
I
course.
get-
The
I get
concept
that.
of reparations is sound. When you harm someone, you're responsible to make up for it as well as you can.
Yes, and we talked about this a few years ago when it was just being kicked around on talk shows.
Yeah.
Now you have city councils, putting together exploratory committees and discussing the logistics of how it would work and what the payments ought to be,
Right.
mostly in California. And we'll get to one case in Indiana. So I thought we would revisit the topic.
Let's think about what are the arguments for reparations.
Go
Okay.
ahead.
So one is just the historical injustice that slavery was a state-sanctioned system, and the legacy of this history has led to persistent racial disparities in income, wealth, education, health, and incarceration. That's the claim.
Okay.
That legacy has harmed people for all that time. The second one is economic disadvantage, that the descendants of slaves were denied the opportunity to accumulate wealth
Mm-hmm.
because there is familial wealth that gets passed on from generation to generation. The third is government responsibility. The United States government has a responsibility to rectify the wrongs of the past committed against African Americans. That the government was complicit in this whole thing.
Sure.
Then there's the moral argument, which is just a question of justice. It's a matter of moral obligation and justice. The slaves suffered significant harm as a result of slavery and systemic racism, and they deserve to be compensated. And then the next one would be sort of the symbolic value of it, that paying reparations would acknowledge the suffering that African Americans went through, and all the stuff that they've had to deal with. So those are some of the arguments for reparations. And to tell you the truth, I have sympathy for parts of most of them.
Yes, I agree.
Some of them I think are a little flaky, but generally speaking, as I said before, if somebody commits a wrong, then they should have to pay it back. But the question here is, what do you do with this?
Exactly. That's where the problem is. Like, yes, were injustices done, and should one do the best to rectify them? Yes. The devil's in the details.
Yes. So there's a saying that I heard from a Lutheran pastor one time, and talking about the concept of divorce, and he was saying, you just can't always unscramble an egg.
Yeah.
There are situations where something has just gotten so messy that you really can't take it back to unmessiness, and you can't always fix all these things. So maybe we could just kind of go through some of the difficulties with making this work.
I think I want to establish what exactly are the people calling for reparations saying. That if you say slavery, you mean because there was slavery. This is one of the ones that doesn't work. Because my ancestors suffered a thing that I did not suffer, then people who were not responsible for that need to owe me something.
Yeah, so I guess the argument is that it wasn't just slave owner Jim Bob owning these slaves. It was, the whole system, the whole culture, the government, the law, everything was holding people down so that they weren't able to accumulate the wealth that they otherwise would have been able to do because the whole system was against them.
Right.
So that's because on the one hand, as far as I know, none of my ancestors owned slaves. They were too poor. And my ancestors are all peasants. And as far as I know, they never owned any slaves. But the argument really isn't so much finding the ancestors of slave owners and the ancestors of slaves. Say this group has to pay that group.
Yeah.
It's more that the whole system was corrupt and oppressive and all that kind of stuff. Which is true, of course.
Yeah.
But then, okay, I'll grant you that it was wrong. The system was wrong. The laws were wrong. And we've changed that. But how are you going to undo it? How do you undo the past?
I don't know. So first off, do you have to be... So they're not talking about descendants of slaves. So any black person that's in this country...
Well, that's a hard distinction, right? Because, are all black people in the country today descendants of slaves? No.
Not at all.
No. And are all white people descendants of slave owners? No.
Right. So would you have to come up with a genealogical, tree,
right?
Which for most people don't exist.
Yeah.
Tying you to slavery, or would it have to be? Well, no, it doesn't have to be. It's just like the systemic racism that is persistent that came from slavery.
Yeah.
Well, now you're just asking for, trying to rectify something that you can't quantify.
Yeah.
I mean, in what way? Because you could look at like I was saying earlier, the most successful immigrant group are Nigerians. So you can't say that because of racism, people with black skin aren't getting a fair shake, and therefore they can't have the success. Therefore, they need to be compensated for that. So that doesn't work at all. How far back would you have to be in this country to say that? Well, I've been,
Yeah. How you figure out who are the recipients of this is just very, very difficult because a lot of people are of mixed race, right? So how do you unscramble that?
Great grandfather is the only black person in your lineage, so you're 164th.
Yeah.
Black. Okay, no. That's not enough. 132nd. I mean, until we have a friend. She's black. The husband is white. 2 daughters, very close in age. One looks like her, just with slightly lighter skin, and the other one looks just like Dad. She's white with blue eyes and curly blonde hair.
Huh.
So they both walk into the and she's would be half black, right? One mom and dad.
Right.
They both walk into the reparations office and they'd be like, "What are they?" Right? You don't look black enough.
Right. Yeah.
So it's just.
And then you have this concept. You have this concept
of
of group responsibility. Like, Like, think about this. You have a slave-owning family where the father supported slavery, but the son was against it. Now, is that family somehow collectively responsible for this decision? Like, you're really getting into the question of can a group be held responsible for something that the group did? I'm not sure exactly how you do that.
Well, and then this group went to war with itself.
Yeah.
Half of them, I don't know how they divide the numbers between the 600,000 casualties. Well, let's just say they're down the middle. Well, 300,000 of them died to free slaves.
Yeah, if that's why they fought. But yes, so
Well, it was states' rights, but there was one particular right they had in mind.
yes.
So.
But I'm just saying that the Northerners, the Northern troops, certainly one of the things that they promoted more towards the end of the war was to free the slaves. But early on, I think it was just, how dare you break away from us?
Well, just young men itching for a fight.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
I mean,
right.
and
Running
what
off
were the
glory.
percentage of white men that fought were from families that owned slaves? First off, not that many, percentage-wise, not that many families did own slaves.
Right.
And the ones that fought tended to be the poor ones who
That's right.
certainly didn't own slaves.
On both sides,
Yeah.
even in the South, a lot of those.
Yeah, that's
a lot
what I
of
mean.
those-
No, that's what mostly. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, you were the people in the South weren't fighting for slaves. They were just fighting for. We don't think government should be telling us what to do.
We don't want those Yankees telling us what to do. But this
All right.
idea of holding a group responsible for what it did, well, should the modern Democrat Party be held responsible for what the 1950s Democrat Party did? Because
right.
So you run into these kinds of weird questions where you're going to hold a group. We're going to hold white people responsible. We're going to say black people are victims and white people are oppressors. Well, is that really fair?
Right, or they
all
say
white people?
the government. Well, the government is just made up of people, and it's made up of laws, and we don't have any of the people or any of the laws
Right.
that were responsible for slavery back then.
Yeah.
Or the United States. Well, when you talk about your 400 years, most of those 400 years that was England, and so if you're holding the United States is really only the last 75 years of your 400 years. Of enslaved. How do you parse this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's actually an interesting point. That from the beginning of the country until slavery was ended, the majority of that time, we weren't the United States of America.
No.
Right. So another big moral part of this is, can you reward or punish people for what their ancestors did?
Yeah.
Is that really right? Can we say, well, 3 generations ago, you did these horrible things, therefore we're going to punish the grandchildren? Is that right?
Right, but you would also be. It would just be tax money. It would just come out of the general fund. 13% of which, or whatever the black, Latino, and Asian, and they're contributing to this pot of money.
Yeah.
Unless you're going to. Right, get in a situation where we're going to tax specific people. That's never.
Yeah, you can't do that. So everybody gets taxed, and some of that money gets paid to certain people. Isn't that going to create more racial resentment and animosity than?
Yes, I think somewhere that you had, doing the right, making amends or something like that, like acknowledging. Oh, and that's going to make things so much better, right? You owe me, you didn't pay me enough. That level of resentment is exactly how you smooth over.
Yeah, that's not going to make everybody happy by doing that. It seems to me that there's another thing to look at here. Is there clearly was an injustice, and some people will argue there still is an enduring problem. Okay, so even if we accept that premise that there's an enduring structural problem, which I'm not positive I accept, but let's say we do for a moment. Just because there's a problem doesn't mean that government is the solution. It also doesn't mean that money is the solution.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, the solution might be more of a cultural change. The solution might not be passing a law or the government doing something or handing out money. I think people run too quickly to, there's a problem, we need a law. There's a problem, the government needs to step in. Well, It's not always the government's business to fix these things.
Yeah, and if you're saying that black people would be doing better if it wasn't for this, but if you keep backing it up to slavery, well, you would never have been here in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got the illogical. Let's skip with the illogical idea that you would even exist if it wasn't for slavery, because nobody in your family would have met each other.
Right.
But let's just dismiss that and say, all right, if it hadn't been, and I wouldn't be in this sorry state that I'm in, if there just hadn't been slavery to begin with, and all of my relatives would have still met each other, and I would be alive today somewhere in Africa, doing so much better.
You know, that's a big question. Would they really be? So reparations, basically, the whole concept is, I would have been better off but for what you did to me.
Yes, yes. And if this is a quote, this is from the Larry Elder's show. Mm-hmm. If Black America were a separate country, its gross GDP would make it the 17th wealthiest country in the world. Economist Walter Williams said blacks have come further ahead from further behind and over a shorter period of time than any people in the history of the world. Mm. And runs through some... here we go. This is Harvard, black Democrat and Harvard sociologist Orlando Patterson. The sociological truths are that America, while still flawed in its race relations and its stubborn refusal to institute a rational universal welfare system, is now the least racist white majority society in the world, has a better record of legal protection of minorities than any other society, white or black, offers more opportunities to a greater number of black persons than any other society, including all those of Africa.
Yeah,
so making the claim that, gosh, how much better I would be doing if there was never slavery, that's complete nonsense. If the tail end of the argument was, okay, I accept that I'm actually the beneficiary of being here.
Yeah.
I just haven't been given the opportunities of other people that are here that you have. And it's got a little bit more. Now you've moved completely away from the slavery argument.
Yeah. So here you get into this difficult. It's a difficult moral argument, because obviously slavery was a moral evil, and obviously, you know, taking people as property and taking them away. Well, actually, I mean, somebody else took them away from their families, and we took them over here, and then using them as property and all that. Obviously, it was a great evil, but sometimes a good comes out of evil. And like an example might be, let's say somebody stabs me, and I get taken into the hospital, and while they're operating on me, they discover that I have a tumor, and the tumor was going to kill me, and they take the tumor out.
Yeah.
And, you know, so the end result is good, even though nobody's going to say that it was good of that person to stab me, right?
Yeah,
and we have something somewhat analogous going on here with slavery, where definitely an evil was done, but for the descendants, for not for the slaves, but for the descendants of the slaves, they turned out to be better off than they would have been had there not been slavery in the first place.
Yes, and Dinesh D'Souza, who's from India, makes that claim concerning colonization of India. Mm-hmm. He's like, yeah, it wasn't that great for the people who were suffering under the British system, but the result is that we are a much more successful nation, having instituted British administration, British law, mm-hmm. and the British education system.
Yes. And
so, ultimately, are you going to say were we better off for colonization? Actually, yes.
Yeah. So I listened to a statement that he made about this, where there was like a generational gap, where he was talking to his grandfather or something like that, who was really upset about colonization because he kind of lived through
What would have been the early 60s?
Yeah, so he would.
Oh, so so his dad would have been whatever.
His dad or his grandfather or whoever it was would have lived through the oppression that Indians suffered under the Brits. And Dinesh is like, well, I don't know. I mean, I'm getting a good education. We've got good law. We speak. Things are actually pretty good. So you have this question of, was Dinesh's father or grandfather, whoever it was, harshly treated and injustice done to him?
Right.
Yes. But is Dinesh better off because of it? Yes.
Yeah.
So we have this situation here with slavery where an evil was done, but the descendants of the slaves are better off than they would have been otherwise. And that's in no way to justify slavery. I mean, obviously slavery is a horrible, wicked thing. But
it does undercut the argument that my life, I would have been better off if there had never been slavery.
Now
because otherwise you're just saying, because my ancestors suffered, I need to be repaid.
Yeah, but then the other side of this, if we were to look at it from the other way, is to say, well, okay, yes, maybe I'm better off than I would have been if my family had stayed in Africa, but I'm not as well off as I would have been if I was white.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. No, I agree. I mean,
So there's all kinds of ways to parse this, and it just gets back to the whole unscrambling of an egg thing. It's like, it's so complicated. If you were to if I do you a harm, if I wreck your car, burn down your house, something like that, we can calculate the harm, and put a price tag on it. I don't know how you even conceptually put a price tag on all this kind of thing and figure out who owes what and how much they owe.
Yeah, and so, in nearby Prince George's County, I think it was the wealthiest. I don't know, how do you put it? They have the highest income black population.
Majority black population. Prince George's County is majority black, and
in the country.
Yes.
And so, how would you make the argument to them? Well, I don't know. You can't. No. I guess the people who are struggling, who say I can't make it because of the legacy of slavery, and then I can't afford to live in some of those neighborhoods in Prince George's County.
Right.
Well, they're doing okay. What do you mean? So you specifically are suffering in ways that other black people, and certainly not recent immigrants, Caribbean immigrants and African immigrants, who are doing quite well here. So does everybody get paid?
Yeah. I don't know how you calculate all that kind of stuff. And then even if you start to do that, if you start to say we're going to figure out who's owed what, where does it end? Why don't we also talk about like the Indians, mistreatment of the Indians,
well,
mistreatment
you
of
could
Jews,
say
mistreatment of
any and all pre-Columbian peoples.
Yes.
Have some claim to the Spanish, the Portuguese, the Dutch, whoever else had, showed up and tried to find El Dorado.
I have this book at home called From Troubled Times, and it's about my ancestors on my father's side and how they were persecuted in Switzerland. Okay. And, they had religious persecution because they were Mennonites. And, is somebody supposed to compensate me for that? I read this, these horrible things were done to my ancestors at this time. But, am I supposed to go to Switzerland and say, you owe me some money for what you did to my ancestors however many generations ago?
Right, because you would have been, they were wealthy merchants, say. And you're like, I would have been the beneficiary of that continued family wealth had they not been persecuted.
Yeah, they were actually farmers, but they might have they would have had better farms. You can make a lot of money in farming if you do it right.
How about my Don Lemon story?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so after the Queen died, there you had the royal commentators of the world, doing interviews, and of course Don Lemon immediately jumps in with the reparations argument. We can't just let the woman, right? Oh, maybe this would be a good time for reparations for colonialism. Even this, listen to this. Him talking. What he's saying. They're wondering, like 100 billion, 24 billion here, and 500 million there. What are those legitimate concerns? So the royal commentator, she says, I think you're right about reparations in terms of, if people want it, though, they need to, what they need to do is go back to the beginning of the supply chain. That was Africa. When across the world, when slavery was taking place, which was the first nation in the world to abolish slavery? It started with William Wilberforce, and it was the British. In Great Britain, they abolished slavery. 2,000 navalmen died on high seas to stop slavery. Why? Because the African kings were rounding up their own people. They had them in cages, waiting in beaches. No one was running to Africa to get them. She says, you're totally right. If reparations need to be paid, we need to go back to the beginning of the supply chain. Who was rounding up their own people and having them handcuffed in cages? And Dodd Lemon flummoxed. It's an interesting discussion, Hillary. We'll continue discussing in the future.
So I guess the application to the United States would be maybe descendants of slaves in the United States should be trying to get reparations from Africa.
The descendants of the African
kings who rounded them up and sold them to the slave traders who brought them over to America.
You can see how this is just getting more and more complicated.
Where does it stop? And there is this thing in the law called a statute of limitations.
Yeah.
And part of the reason for that is as time goes on, things just get ridiculously complicated. And it's very hard to figure out what the harm actually was after more and more time goes by.
Right, so let's just say my grandfather was swindled out of his farm by some unscrupulous banker, and I come up with some paperwork that seems to show, that he was signing something he didn't know he was signing. Well, the bank's not around. Or if the bank is around, and
it's a different bank.
What do you do? Yeah, somebody else has bought the bank, what are you going? Right, you're at that point. You're going, yeah, you're probably right, but sorry, there's not much we can do about this point.
Right. So reparations for slavery are just there's such a tenuous connection between then and now that it would be impossible to put a dollar value on it. It'd be impossible to figure out who should be paying whom, what everybody should get. But that doesn't necessarily mean the whole concept of reparations for bad conduct are wrong. And I think we have an example of where maybe there are some situations where real reparations could be done for more recent problems.
That first or last?
We can do that now. Yeah.
Yeah, so okay, I agree that so globally, Black Americans are doing quite well.
Mm-hmm.
There is no place. It's funny that this level of grievance has gotten to where it is when right now there is no place where there's more justice and more opportunity for Black people than in the United States of America in 2023.
Right.
And yet, for some reason, we
keep hearing that it's the worst.
It's getting worse. It gets getting worse and worse and worse.
Yeah.
It's just it's nonsense. But yes, their numbers are not equal to other Americans. So what is to be done? Right? How do the median income, however that works, depending on where you are, not in Prince George's County, but how about stop helping? How about stop incentivizing failure? Stop paying people to not work. Stop encouraging single motherhood. Stop promoting victimhood. You see, Black people are smart and capable, enterprising people. Stop telling them that they can't succeed without government programs from Democrats. It's patronizing. It's the infantilization of Black people.
Yeah, so I have a book on my Kindle that I've read most of. It's called "Please Stop Helping Us" by Jason Riley. And the reality is that a lot of the efforts to try to counteract racism have done more harm than they've done good. Like the whole Great Society, Lyndon Johnson programs and all that sort of stuff.
The whole welfare program.
They really haven't helped.
No, none of it's been like 40 years and $4 trillion since the Great Society, and the percentage of Black people in poverty is the same.
And the income disparity is apparently worse.
And families are ruined,
right.
And and we've got drug problems we didn't have. So I wonder. So this is all Democrat run.
Yeah.
This is Democratic compassion. Republicans are meanies because they don't think that these programs are helpful.
Yeah.
When you can see the direct link between suffering in Black communities and Democrat policies, are they too dumb to know that the policies are hurting, or is this just, are they cynically aware that our power comes from dependence? That us being able to tout the successes of people becoming independent and helping them become independent of the government, actually all that does is loosen our control over them.
Yeah,
Is it thought through, or do they know what they're doing?
I think, the more I observe politics, I think it all just comes down to what plays today,
right,
with the base. What stupid thing can I say that's going to make people think that I'm a good guy and they should vote for me?
Yes.
And the whole question of whether it actually works or whether it's going to have good effects or anything else, that's not even in their minds. The only thing that's in their minds is, if I say this, will more people vote for me?
Well, yes, but it's two things. It's the power. It's being seen to be doing good.
Yeah.
So knowing, even if you know that you're not doing good, if you're getting the credit for appearing to do good because I'm voting for this bill, but it's gone outside of political power, grievance has become an industry. And this industry must always find new injustice to support itself. So it's always going to tell you that things are worse than they were. And this psychologically plays on, on black people's belief in improving their own condition. So they either do not want success because it works for them, or they just refuse to acknowledge any of the success. But will it get any better? Will it stop? No way, because now we have these ever-expanding DEI industry that is just too lucrative. It's probably the largest growing business right now.
Yeah, if you want,
and it's all grievance-based.
If you want to make a lot of money, be a DEI consultant. But the thing is, it's obvious that oppression and all those kind of things is on the decline, because now they have to dig up microaggressions. We don't have any macroaggressions anymore.
Yeah, or yes.
We have to find microaggressions so that we can justify the whole...
Yes, Thomas Sowell says it's the economics of racism.
Yeah.
Right? There's more demand than there is supply.
Right.
So you have to create new types, implicit bias, microaggressions. So there's another newfangled word out there where you're being racist even if you don't think you're being racist or know you're being racist. You are, because we need racism.
Yeah. Because
racism is what fuels the industry.
Yeah.
And hurts black people.
Right. Well, let's get back to the question of reparations, and an example where reparations actually might be a good idea and measurable and practical.
So San Francisco is looking for trying to pay $5 million, and San Francisco and California are competing with who can suggest the highest number in their little, whatever they call the exploratory groups, right? Mm-hmm. How this would work and where the money, $5 million is just the basement. No idea where the money's coming from.
Yeah, they don't know.
No idea how they get these numbers. But there is one place where they're actually writing checks.
Okay, where's that?
It's in Evansville, Indiana.
Okay.
The small town. Our friend is from there.
I do.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I've actually been there.
Mm-hmm.
They are writing $25,000 checks to people who have been wronged by the housing industry of Evansville in Evansville's past.
Okay. Now this is
okay.
An example.
Now we're getting somewhere.
They have a specific thing. They know that a specific program or policy or law or something in a specific time in history.
Yeah, they're right. There were banking. There were districting issues, keeping black people from buying in certain areas, certain types of loans that they could not get. They couldn't. Their the percentage on their loan was higher, or they couldn't get a loan because they wanted to buy in a certain place. Whatever. So, but specific policies, specific times,
and affecting specific people who can be identified today.
Yes.
Yes.
And the money goes to something specific. Also, it goes to housing.
Okay. So this is an example where you have a harm that can be measured against certain people, and you can identify those people, and you can say, okay, we should make up that harm for these people.
Yes.
And that, I think, that's the right thing to do.
But to me, this is not reparations. This is a class action suit.
Exactly. It's the same thing as if, GM was cheating me on putting the wrong tires on my car or something like
yeah,
that.
yeah. There you go. Like, okay, so did you live? Were you attempting to purchase a home between 1955 and 1978 in the Evansville area? Come see us. We may have some.
Exactly.
You may be due for some compensation.
Yes, and that is the right way to do this sort of thing. You have a clear harm for a clear group of people,
Yeah.
and then you come up with a appropriate compensation, and you pay them that amount of money. Okay, I'm all for that.
Yeah.
If we could do that with slavery, there might have been a time. There might have been a time when we could have done that with slavery. Maybe back in 1870.
Yeah.
We could have said, okay, here's the appropriate amount to pay slaves, former slaves.
Right, yeah, and also to give you a leg, because this is one thing. So what happened when they said at Appomattox, you signed the papers, we lost, there are no slaves. What did they do? The people just go, okay, I guess I'll go get a job.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In a way, did some of them just stay right there and just say, I'd like to be paid instead? And they said, okay, here's $1.
Yeah.
You're not a slave anymore.
I don't know a whole lot about that.
I don't either,
period,
but just thinking about how that would even
how
work.
would it even work?
Reconstruction?
Because
what
you had to redo the entire economy, the whole structure of the economy. Like you have these people who had been your slaves, and now where are they going to go?
Right, and then you say, "Hey, get off my land." They're like, "We don't have any place to go."
Where do you want us to go? Yeah, they didn't all come north, right?
Yeah.
So I don't really know.
I don't either.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, but at least at that point in time,
yes.
something tangible could have been done. These people were slaves. Let's give them some compensation. That could have been done. Today, it's just silliness.
We can't
possibly.
It's the unscrambled egg. It's the statute of limitations.
Yeah, but you can't undo all the horrors of the past. You can't go back and try to fix history. It just can't be done.
It can't be done. Okay, I mean, we worked our way through this. I hope.
I hope so. I mean, on the one hand, obviously slavery was a huge evil, and it would be lovely if we could somehow fix it. But I don't think this is the way to fix it. I think the way to fix it is to move forward.
All right.
And,
how about we can at least rescue the show with a little levity?
Okay. Let's do that.
And where else are you going to go?
Well, it's got to be the paper of record, the Babylon Bee.
And when I punched in reparations just to get a funny article, I got more than one. So we'll just knock out some headlines here.
Yeah. Colin Kaepernick sues adoptive parents for $21 million in reparations. That's a good one.
That's a good one. Everyone ordered to pay everyone reparations, as every race owned every other race at some point.
Yeah, true. Very true. Half-black woman ordered to pay herself reparations.
And we've got Democrats demand Republicans pay them reparations for freeing their slaves.
That's harsh. Okay.
It's harsh.
Men demand reparations from women due to Eve eating the apple. Well, I mean, if you're going to go back that,
there's no statute of limitations.
I know.
You might as well go
all the way back.
Although back to this, the Democrat Republicans, they also did one for Juneteenth, celebrating the day that Republicans freed the slaves of Democrats.
Right, and
which
actually is kind of true. Yeah, so that's the way it goes. Well, anyway,
all right. Well, we didn't solve anything there.
We didn't solve anything, but I think we discussed some general principles and how you can't unscramble the egg. Yes. That's the problem.
Yes, it's not that the idea is stupid. It's just that it's impossibly cumbersome.
Yeah,
yes.
it's so distant and it's impossibly cumbersome, and there's no workable way to do it. So we've got to think of something else.
Yes, and otherwise it's just going to it's just going to be part of the grievance industry.
Right.
There's a lot of cachet.
There we go. All right. Cheers.